On today's show, Matt Moore from the Action Network joins us to discuss everything he's hearing ahead of Thursday's NBA trade deadline and where things stand on what the Heat will do with Kyle Lowry and some names to watch in the front court. Plus, some inside baseball on what it's like for other front offices to deal with the Heat in weeks like this one. I think you'll enjoy it. It's all coming up next.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Heat, your Monday to Friday podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg. I'll be joined here in a minute by Matt Moore from the Action Network, however you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Now let's jump right in with Matt Moore. All right, we're here with Matt Moore, NBA writer for the Action Network, also hosts the Locked On NBA show Monday nights, Tuesday mornings, and also co-host of Locked On Nuggets. Matt, let's just jump right in. Recording this a few hours after Dwayne Dedmon got traded to the San Antonio Spurs. Now that happened, is it safe to say that all the blockbuster trades are going to be done, or is there anything else to expect as we get to the deadline?
I mean, what could be better? What more do you want, Wes? That kind of move. You know, it's sad though, because Dedmon was really good in San Antonio, and I actually thought he had some really good moments last year for Miami. So it's kind of a bummer the way that worked out. Yeah. You know, I think as far as the market goes, these are all probability things, and everyone's like, is it going to be a busy deadline? Is it going to be a quiet deadline? And I'm always like, okay, I don't know how anyone would, including Woj. I don't know how Woj would, because so much of it is that you're weighing these things and it's very close. And sometimes you would think you would hear the deals that were proposed and be like, why would you have to take time to think about it? And but you'd be surprised. A lot of it, I think, is I found this to be very accurate. Stan Van Gundy said this a couple of years ago, and it has stuck with me. And I asked other executives about it, and they kind of have built on those thoughts of investor value in the NBA is just massive. And what I mean by that is, if you draft a guy or if you sign him and you're like, this is a guy that we want on the team. We believe that this guy's good. Even if he's your best asset to move, or if things haven't worked out, you still have sunk resources, money, time, development, and emotional ties of this guy was a really good part of our franchise and we really believed in him, and you don't want to let go of that investment that you've made. People don't want to let go of, even if it's necessarily a better one for you, especially because oftentimes it's very rare that market value exceeds investor value. It's just very rare that the market is we think more highly of this person than you do. Mm-hmm. And if so, it's usually because you know something that they don't about their personality or whatever. But as we kind of sit here at this point on Tuesday, I think that there are enough things on the table where there will be some things that will probably surprise us. If nothing happens, I'm going to be a little surprised, just because I don't get a sense that there's as many teams as usual. They're no, we're good. We feel really good about where we're at. There's a lot of, we don't feel awful. We're not what's the point? But it would be nice to change things up. Add on top of that, healthy market of both buyers and sellers now with various teams and where they're at. And I do think that we're going to see, I think, a decent, if not healthy, amount of trades by the end of the deadline.
Well, you mentioned sunk costs and some of your favorite guys that guys have in-house, and the Heat are very much guilty of that at times. We could go back to the Tyler Johnson contract, the Son Whiteside contract, even now the Duncan Robinson contract. That's all stuff that I think is impacting Miami right now, even with, I don't think they were in love with Dwayne Dedmon last year. That was more of a, hey, we've got his bird rights, we can make a chunky salary. But now they had to move a future second-round pick to even get off of Dwayne Dedmon's contract, which was not the point of signing that. That was actually supposed to be a value piece that they could actually use to stack up to get a bigger deal. Turns out that they have to move draft capital, get rid of them just to open up cap space. And then with Duncan Robinson, they're doing the same thing. And the question for them is, do we attach a first-round pick to somebody like Duncan Robinson to shed his salary and avoid luxury tax next year? But before we get into that, and then you also mentioned something about some of the internal league discourse, and I do want to have that conversation here, but let's put a pin in it. You wrote a piece today for the Action Network. You get into a bunch of some of the trade tidbits. I want to ask you about some of the things that you've reported in there specific to the point guard market. We'll start there. Fred VanVleet, hot name right now on the market. Interesting for Heat fans because it feels at least somewhat that Kyle Lowry and his future is a little bit tied to Fred VanVleet. I think you look at teams that could want Fred VanVleet, and if they're not able to land Fred VanVleet for whatever reason, Kyle Lowry could be on their list down somewhere at the end of that list somewhere. What are you hearing on Fred VanVleet, and how much is he really tied to maybe Kyle Lowry's future?
So I would say that the order of preference for the teams that I've heard about is Fred VanVleet, even though he's going to want a huge new contract, because at least you get to make that assertion, right? You get him, you can make that assertion, and then you can decide if you want to sign him or not. 2 is Conley, because he's got seems like he's got a little bit fresher legs at this point, and it's not as good as Fred VanVleet because of the money involved, and it's dealing with Utah, which is painful. It's always painful. Not, everyone's like Danny Ainge, and I'm like, it's not just Danny Ainge. Like that's a smart organization that's going to ring you.
Yeah.
And then I think it's Lowry, and Lowry's kind of the third name on that list as far as point guards go, with like Monte Morris probably 4th on the point guards target list. I think the stuff on Lowry has been interesting, trying to gauge what's real and what's not, in that there was a real big push of like, hey, we're pretty interested in Kyle Lowry. And then I think talks advanced, and Miami very smartly put out like, no, thank you. No, thank you. We're quite happy with Kyle Lowry. Thank you. Which is a really smart thing to do. And it's pretty common that this happens also where there's not one or the other that's accurate about this, but what you'll hear is like, there'll be a national report or from people around the league, like, just reading tea leaves and talking to people about the market that will indicate a guy is available. And then the local reporter will be like, nope, like that, not planning to do it. Like, this is what they say. And it's not that either one is necessarily like a full-time lie. It's that these things are very fluid, right? And it's like Salt Lake City. This happened with Utah too, where Utah, like the reporters were like, they say they're not moving anybody. Like, I'm just telling you what they say is they're not moving. Oh, they traded Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell inside of a month. Okay, well, that's how that goes. So, but there's other cases where people will be like, no, we hear he's getting moved. We know, yeah, he's gonna be gone. And like, I've learned in those situations to just be like, okay, we'll see, because there's, including honestly Toronto, who like everyone's like, yeah, Lowry's gonna be gone. Like, he wants out of there. He wants to go to Miami. And we're like, oh, they got to move him by the deadline. What are they gonna do? Wait till free agency? Yes, they're gonna wait till free agency, and then they're gonna get a sign and trade. So I would say that Fred VanVleet's, I don't know that Fred is tied to Lowry in so much as Miami's value on return will improve if Fred goes off the market. If the Raptors are just like, you know what, screw it, we don't like any of these offers, we're gonna sit this out, which again, they've done before.
Right.
That's why there's a whole lot of like, oh yeah, like, right. I heard yesterday from 2 different people, like, it sounds very much like the Raptors are going to go ahead and do like a total sale, like everybody but Pascal and maybe Pascal. And I was like, I'm sure that that's something that they might be suggesting in order to get people on the hook, but they've proven enough times to just sit out and wait through it. But if Fred's off the board, if Toronto calls teams on Thursday morning, which is usually when teams will say either they're in or out, if they call teams on Thursday and are like, we're good, like, we're just going to go ahead and set this through, and Utah is not going to change, like they're going to remain the same level. Now you have an opportunity for Miami to get in there and be like, okay, like, hey, we're your third option. You're either going to have to get bloodlet by the Jazz, or we've got Kyle Lowry, quality addition. And I think there's enough teams, and including some ones that probably haven't been reported yet. Like I think Minnesota probably has kicked the tires more than once. I usually look for teams that there have been multiple reports or that I heard of months ago that they have now judged the market and then come back to a deal that was discussed earlier to be like, hey, let's pick this back up again and see if we can work this out. So yes, the short answer to your question is Fred VanVleet value, like his presence on the trade market does impact Kyle Lowry, but I'm not sure that the Heat are going to be able to get significantly more if Fred VanVleet goes off the board. It just makes it easier to move Lowry because there will be more suitors for him.
Today's episode of Locked On Heat is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools. They go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates. Identify the most qualified candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect with them fast and for free. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to screen and rate applicants based on your job qualifications, all on one platform. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Fred VanVleet makes sense for a team like the Orlando Magic, right? They're young. Fred VanVleet's young. You reported that there's been some conversations between those two. And so, the Magic, Kyle Lowry, that doesn't make any sense. But for a team like the Clippers or the Timberwolves, like you just mentioned, Kyle Lowry does make sense for those teams if they can't find a way to go ahead and get Fred VanVleet. And I think you make a really, really good point. Like, let's just call it the Clippers, right? If I'm the Clippers and I'm like, all right, we got to get a point guard in here. We like Terrence Mann, but he's not a point guard. John Wall hasn't worked out. Reggie Jackson, we know what that is. We want Fred VanVleet. Now you're dealing with Toronto kind of doing this. Well, maybe we're not going to move him. And you're like, all right, you know what? Screw you guys. We're sick of this. Then you move on to Danny Ainge and Mike Conley, and then you have to deal with Danny Ainge. And probably 15 minutes into that phone call, you're like, okay, man, I'm sorry. I'm not giving you 3 future first rounders for Mike Conley. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
And then you just move on to Miami. They're like, we'll just take a couple of contracts. Are we good? And then if you're the Clippers and you're working on literally a deadline, you might just say, you know what? Yeah, Pat Riley, Andy Ellisberg, Adam Simon, we're good. We'll just do this. And so that's why I keep kind of coming back to the Clippers as a team that makes sense for Kyle Lowry. I think it would be pretty easy. I think it's just like, hey, pick 2, like Robert Covington, Luke Kennard, Reggie Jackson. Like those are kind of the
Marcus Morris
Sr. Yeah, just pick 2. Which ones do you want? And then we can make, which ones the money work, blah, blah, blah. And then you make a deal. Now, that sounds way easier than it is, but you would understand why the Clippers would start at the top of their list and then maybe work their way down to Kyle Lowry. Do you have any other thoughts on the Clippers, or we could talk Timberwolves too?
Yeah, I think I do. I've reported this, and this is not a new thing. It's one of the reasons I feel pretty good about it, right? You're always kind of like, I'm very skeptical of all this stuff, even though I peddle in it. But like, Kawhi wants a point guard is not a new thing. That's like a multi-year running storyline. And so if we have this like consistently that this has gotten out that Kawhi's been pushing for a point guard, then that's likely coming from somewhere and
right,
somewhere reliable. And so if Kawhi wants a point guard, like obviously Lowry makes like look at 2 of the 3 names on the list. It's literally Fred VanVleet, who he played with, Kyle Lowry, who he played with, and Mike Conley, who he played against. Like this is not super complicated to kind of decipher. I think the thing I always struggle with Miami, because like they're this like not a very leaking out organization. Like they keep things buttoned up. They're one of like 5 organizations that's pretty good about it, and I think everyone continues to be very. I was talking to someone yesterday who works in the front office in the West, and they were just like, with Miami, you're always kind of trying to figure out, like, do you want what you should want, which is probably future assets, or are you just clearing space? Am I helping? And he said, you're always worried that you're helping them make a bigger move. Like that's what you're worried about, is that Miami's going to use what you do, and then they're going to turn around and all of a sudden they got way better on something that you could have gotten in on. So there's kind of like that concern as well. But I do think that the Clippers make a lot of sense. Like Lowry fits exactly what they need. Like Lowry doesn't have to hold up the offense. Lowry doesn't, like, all he's going to do is basically, floor general, play good defense, which, getting harder, but still up there. And his good nights will be really helpful in the playoffs. So they can take risks on that given where they're at. And part of their theory going in was, look at all this depth we have. And like they ran an 8-man rotation last night. So they have guys that they can excise from the rotation and feel okay about it. So yeah, I do think that the Clippers will at least be on the phone with Miami if Miami continues to make Kyle available all the way through the deadline.
Also pushes the pace for them is in a way that is more opportunistic as opposed to just breakneck speed. And that's where I think they tried to acquire John Wall, or they did acquire John Wall and tried to make him sort of their pace mover. And that didn't really work out. And so I'm with you. Look, I keep coming back to the Clippers. It just makes a lot of sense. But as you and I know, if something makes way too much sense, it probably isn't going to happen at the deadline. But let's talk about Minnesota too, because I was kind of early in on the, hey, D'Angelo Russell for Kyle Lowry just makes sense. No reporting behind it. I was like, this makes sense for what both teams need. Then D'Angelo Russell started shooting better. Kyle Lowry started shooting worse. And I was like, maybe that's not going to really happen. And then you start hearing the reports about it. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe this is actually a thing. I checked in with a third party who has dealt with the Heat, but not part of the Heat, not part of the Timberwolves, but basically said that he would be shocked and surprised if the Heat did make that move for D'Angelo Russell. And, it's easy to talk yourself into it, kind of score 38% shooting from 3-point range this year. Most importantly, expiring contract this year, you get off the money, you move on. And if it doesn't cost you a draft pick, that's an easy way to do it, to get off of the Kyle Lowry money. But he said he would be surprised because the Heat just don't bring in guys like D'Angelo Russell in terms of the culture thing. And that's what everybody keeps coming back to. Yeah. Again, makes sense, checks out. But it all comes back down to priorities, right? If priority number one is get off the money and priority number two is we need people that fit the culture, then priority one matters more than priority two. Like you said, I have no sense of where the Heat are at in terms of where their priorities are right now. And maybe that's another thing too, where it's like they get the call and they're like, really? You're going to do this D'Angelo Russell thing? Are you just going to go ahead and flip D'Angelo Russell for some other awesome player that we could have had? Could be another option too. Maybe it's a 3-team deal. Anyway, that's the latest I've heard on Minnesota. What about you?
Yeah, so I heard it. I heard this one a few weeks back and I haven't heard anything on it recently. So I think that it's, all the time with these, I'm always like, I will call sometimes and be like, hey, heard this, I'm trying to keep my excitement down. Like, heard this thing. I'd like to hear you if this is a thing you're working on. And then I will get very often, oh no, yeah, we talked about that 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, great. Okay, thanks. So I think the Wolves make a good partner in part because I will go ahead and label them as desperate to move on from D'Lo.
Yeah.
And they would not describe themselves as such. But when you've called as many teams as you have about D'Angelo Russell to try and move him, and I think it's mostly just like my feeling on it personally is I think D'Lo's fine. I think D'Lo and Cat is not great. I think D'Lo and Cat and Anthony Edwards, that combination of personalities, I think is where they get in trouble. And like Cat, like a big reason D'Lo's there is because he's best friends with Cat. Like this matters in terms of the makeup. And they don't want to give him away from nothing, but like they talked to Phoenix a lot about it, trying to get a deal done for D'Lo. And so like they've tried to work out a number of things. So I think it's like Minnesota will be encouraged. I don't think Minnesota is at a place of will attach assets to get off of the money, especially not for like a Kyle Lowry. But I think that they have a lot of incentive to get a deal done, and that's always easier. Two, I would say, I think a lot of this is D'Lo is complicated because you have all of the stuff that with him and his play style. I will say this though, like D'Angelo Russell loves basketball.
Yep.
Like, he puts in the work. Like D'Angelo Russell like loves basketball. He is a hooper's hooper. And so if you get him into the culture and he responds well, right? Like that's the question is like, is the work ethic there to be, precise and excellent on the things, especially like defensively, what a mess. But like, if it works, it's going to be like, man, look at what the Heat did with D'Angelo Russell. Yeah. That could be a real upside move. Like, I personally think it's a really good idea. However, it does come with enough caveats of, I just don't know if Miami is looking at it and being like, would we rather just deal with the Kyle situation or try and take on this new problem? Because at least we know who Kyle is, right? And that complication, I think, is one reason why that might be a barrier. That deal makes a ton of sense, like you said, on paper, but the personalities and a lot of this will honestly come down to individual player assessment from the scouting staff in conjunction with the front office. And those are complicated equations to try and figure out.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing you said. It's like, do we take on this new problem halfway through the year? So some fans would be like, hey, it's just a half season D'Angelo Russell. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. On the other hand, the Heat are in the middle of trying to make the playoffs and maybe make a deep run in the playoffs. And it's like, do we really want to take on a new thing that we have to figure out midstream here? While it feels like just now we're starting to figure some other things out. It's tough. I'm with you. I think it makes a ton of sense. I covered D'Angelo Russell in Golden State. I could vouch for exactly what you're talking about. He really plays hard. It's just sometimes it's like, would you take some of that effort and put it in on the defensive end? Just like 10% more, just a little bit more is what you're asking for there. Today's episode of Locked On Heat is brought to you by FanDuel. This year, the only app you need at your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're really excited about our new sports betting partner for Locked On because of the #1 sportsbook in America. It's FanDuel, and if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better because they have so many great features that make sports betting fun and easy. Download FanDuel now so you could bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. You'll get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. If you got the Eagles tonight, maybe you want, or for the Super Bowl, maybe you want to bet on A.J. Brown over 1 touchdown in the game. Maybe you like the Eagles overall. I think they're a 1-point underdog in this one. You could bet the Eagles there, or you could bet the Chiefs. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, and super easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid for your winnings instantly. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/LockedOn to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We spent a lot of time on Kyle Lowry and point guards. Big picture, the Heat. We've already kind of talked about this, but they kind of have 3 different routes that they can go in. They could be buyers, try to add to what could be a playoff run here. They could try to shed money next year when we've got extensions kicking in and luxury tax issues that we're always talking about. And then the other thing is, how many of our assets, draft picks, et cetera, do we need to retain because we're the Miami Heat and we're always star chasing, and that could be a thing this summer when it comes to Kevin Durant or any other of the hot names out there. Those are the 3 routes: retain assets, shed money, or be buyers. And you can't really do any of that stuff without affecting the other thing. So just your opinion, like, what do you think the Heat should do?
Oh, what I think they should do. Okay. What I think they should do is it should be assets. I think that there's a lot of teams in this category. I think you should look at the Raptors. And what I mean by that is you win a championship or go to the finals and you believe in that core. You're so close, or you got there. Like, you can believe in this team. You've seen this team in the toughest of moments. You know what they can do. But you're no longer stroking through the water, right? You're no longer just like flying through. You're just kind of treading. And then you start to take on a little bit more water and more water and more water. And now you're the Raptors, who are playing their guys 40 minutes a night with a coach that everyone is talking about moving on from, 3 years removed from a championship, mind you, who is considered one of the best coaches in the league. And you're talking about things like, oh, are they going to have a fire sale? Which, again, I don't think the Raptors are going to do. I think that there should be a mind on trying to build something sustainable, because, like, Bam's going to be great. Like, Bam's going to be great for so long. And I'll also say this. They continue to keep Tyler in these conversations on trades. If you are at the point now, after all of this, where you're still like, boy, I don't know, maybe we should move him for something better, you should move him for something better, because you're not like, if he's not in your untouchable category, you need to find another, you need to have like 2 to 3 guys that you're just like, nope. Like, under no circumstances are we moving these dudes. Like, my understanding is that for Portland, it's Damian Lillard, Anthony Simons, Jeremy Grant. You can argue that you're just like, well, they shouldn't have, either Simons or Grant on that list, and that's fine. But at least Portland's able to be like, this is what we're building with, and we'll figure out the rest. But this is our guys. And right now, given Jimmy and all of the miles and all the injury stuff and all the Jimmy-ness that comes with it, and with where Kyle's at, like, I think you should be looking there. The problem is just they have such a great front office that is universally just lauded. Everyone has nothing but positive things to say about their front office. But there's always this subtext of they're never going to transition or go anywhere else as long as Riley's still doing the thing, right? Like, there's never been the opportunity to move in a different direction. Maybe that's changing. Maybe he's finally like moving away from organizational stuff enough. I don't have that kind of insight on Miami to know. You know better than that than I do. But like that to me is like the equation is if they're really ready, I think you can do not a rebuild, but like a fast reconstruction around a fast redevelopment around Bam, right? Just take new pieces, put them around Bam, focus on that, try and add one other star, but you're going to have to like make some pretty drastic moves to get the assets to get that kind of star. Otherwise, you're just going to be kind of piecing these things together. Now, you took a chance on Jimmy Butler and that worked, but I don't know, and there are other opportunities that will come available. This is the NBA. Stars want out all the time, but I do think that there's some risks there with trying to put all those pieces together and trying to stay above water because you're starting to see like the number of guys that are like, oh wow, they have all these guys starting to dwindle a little bit, just like it did with Toronto.
I agree with you. I'll add to it. My stance. I've given this a lot of thought, way more thought than any normal human should. And I think the core is Bam Adebayo and Tyler Herro, and I think that 2-man game is really starting to click. And I think the only reason that Tyler Herro is in these trade rumors, and I will admit I am way higher on Tyler Herro than most people. I have a bias there that I am fully aware of, and I get criticized all the time for it. Tyler Herro could do no wrong in my eyes, according to the YouTube comments. That said, I think that's a 2-man game that really clicks and needs time to develop and build chemistry and really just work. And I think there's something there. And I think Bam is that kind of player that you can make a foundation of your team. And Jimmy Butler's awesome, and he's going to be awesome regardless of context. He's just going to be awesome.
And much like the Raptors, like you could do the same thing where you're like, hey, we're going to take this core that we've got, and then we're just going to add this final piece on top of it. Yeah, which was Kawhi. Now they had to trade like a foundational guy to do that. And that you can ask the question of who that would be. But I do think it's possible that they can build a good enough team around Jimmy or around Tyler and Bam rather, and then later be like, and then we got this guy, and that was the final piece, and that like he got us over the top.
And in the meantime, my biggest problem with the Heat, and I think the biggest problem that they're facing internally is what window are we really going with? Are we going with the Jimmy Butler window or the Tyler, or more accurately, the Bam Adebayo window? And my argument is I think the Jimmy Butler window is closed. I don't know that window is very much open anymore. So if you're going to make moves, look, if you want to trade for Kevin Durant or Luka Doncic or Giannis or Michael Jordan, whoever it's going to be, there's always ways to bunch all your assets together and figure it out. But in the meantime, I say just build around Tyler and Bam, and Jimmy will do his own thing on top, like you said. And so, and now you start extending your window, and you don't have to make panicky kind of moves in a phone booth, so to speak. You can just sort of spread out and let things sort of organically build. All right, that's my spiel. I'm gonna give you 3 names here, and you could just riff on whatever it is that you think here or have opinions on as we approach the trade deadline. John Collins, Jared Vanderbilt, Kelly Olynyk. You could pick whichever one of those names and go.
Vando, it is shocking to me what I've heard that he is likely to go for. I've heard there's a deal on the table with a Western Conference team. It is not the Nuggets. That is like, I don't have it solid enough to say that like I'm 100% on what, but the strong impression I've gotten from multiple people is that Jared Vanderbilt's going to go for way less than you would think. And that has been very surprising to me because it sounds like he's a name that everybody brings up. And like, I think Vando's pretty good. Yeah. And for whatever reason, it sounds like he is going to go to a Western Conference team. Like that's the default. Unless somebody comes in with a stronger offer, it sounds like he's going for very little. John Collins, I'll say that after the front office restructuring or the coup that happened this year, I've heard that they are less inclined to move Collins. Now, who knows? They are a very unstable organization at this point, but and I think Collins would very much welcome a deal. I think he would like to play somewhere else for a number of reasons, but I don't think that they are inclined to move him. And there have been so many offers that have come across their desk and they've never pulled the trigger that I think it's one of those where if you're trying to get a deal done now, you're facing as much resistance as you would with Toronto. And at least Toronto has a little bit more motivation to make that kind of a move. Kelly Olynyk, surprisingly, not a lot. I haven't heard a lot, so I don't have much to add on KO, except that he makes a lot of sense for just about every team, and I think that he can help pretty much everybody. But I will say this, that if, again, it's the Jazz, right? We have the same problem where it's the Jazz, and the other thing is that backup center is literally the most coveted position in the league right now on the market relative to standards, right? It's not that like backup centers are drawing in more than starting point guards. It's that everybody wants a backup center because there's only like 5 good ones. And now the Heat just traded one of the not good ones, but at least like playable ones. Yeah. So I think KO is going to probably have a lot of colors. That I think that the noise on him, I saw some reports today. The conversation about KO will probably pick up over the next 36 hours.
Jared Vanderbilt, I'm a big fan of his. Sounds like you are too. He's like one of those Twitter darlings that it's like, can the Jazz just trade Vanderbilt straight up for Kevin Durant? Because that's based on what I see on Twitter. They probably could, right? Like, but and then you talk to front office people are like, yeah, he's good. He tries really hard. That's nice.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the Vanderbilt, 6'9". That's pretty good, I guess. All right. That's it. Thanks, Matt, so much for joining us. So much more that we could have gotten into. This, I think, is going to be look, it's been crazy just leading up to the trade deadline. Everybody says, you never know if the deadline is going to be action packed or not. Feels action packed with all this reporting and all those conversations we're having already, regardless of whatever happens. So thanks so much for the time, man. This was fun.
Thanks for having me.